I was with my stepfather, who I was sitting bedside with my stepfather, who was in his final days of life. He'd raised me since I was 10. We weren't all that close in the early years, but we developed a closer bond later in both of our lives. And so it was right around the time of his passing when I was sitting bedside with him, and I was holding his hand. He could no longer communicate verbally, but I think we were able to connect through that point of physical touch. Because as I was sitting there holding his hand, I had a vision of my funeral, not actually of his funeral, but of mine. And I could hear the words being spoken graveside as I was kind of in that coffin being lowered into the earth. Little peaks of daylight coming through, and again, I could hear what was going on, but couldn't talk, couldn't really respond or anything. And whoever was speaking, I don't remember the voice or who it was, basically said, "Here lies Steve Olsher. He dedicated his life to chasing the almighty dollar." And that's all that was said. And it hit me really hard because I realized in that moment that my life was of pretty good meaning to me and those closest to me, but really no one else. And so given everything that I had gone through, from a personal perspective, from a business perspective, and so on, I really felt like there was an opportunity to make a bigger difference and make a different sort of impact. And even if, my teachings could, just sharing some of the things that I had learned and the shortcuts that I could help people take, avoid a lot of the trial and tribulation and brain damage. Just feeling like, hey, if I can help some folks here avoid some of that, then that'll probably be a good thing. So that's when I started writing, and that's when I started doing some teaching and coaching.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. We are very excited that you joined us. If you haven't tuned in, this is the show where we talk to celebrities, thought, and industry leaders to really discover their journey to success. I am super excited that you're joining us. This show is like no other. I can promise you that. You might laugh, you might cry, but you will definitely leave inspired and gain a whole new level of insight into those people that you follow, love, and admire. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. This episode, it's funny, we were just talking about it. It's like, where do I start? I mean, you want to talk about somebody who has, reinvented, dismantled the status quo, started the Funky Pickle, which we'll definitely talk about, which is pretty hilarious, running Podcast Magazine. There really isn't much that this week's guest hasn't done. He's a serial entrepreneur. He has launched several multi-million-dollar companies, an accomplished real estate investor, and a coach who has helped countless people discover their what. Here are just a few of this guy's achievements, right? Founder and editor of Podcast Magazine, chairman, founder of dotcom, New York Times Bestselling Author, real estate developer, host of Reinvention Radio, and on top of it all, this guy's been on CNN, HuffPo, and like a million other places. So please join me in welcoming the maestro of the microphone, America's reinvention expert, Steve Olsher. Steve, welcome to the show.
I need to pay you to do my intros no matter where I go.
Hey, like I said, man, shout out to Tyler. Tyler holds it down, man. We do what we can here.
Nice.
So it's great, man. I mean, like I said, I was joking. It was like, a lot of times we take kind of a linear view, and it's just like, man, you've just done so many things. I'm like, there's just so many ways to take it. So I'm excited for the conversation and to kind of jump into it. So as everyone knows on the show, we focus on telling the story, the journey behind the journey. Everyone sees the success and all the cool things and people have done in the cars. And the reality is there's a whole slew of things that happened, and people experienced to get there. And so definitely excited to kind of go back in time with you a little bit, Steve, and kind of tell your kind of origin story a bit. So we'll start back in Chicago, right? So born in Chicago, raised in Evanston. What was, what are some of like your first memories, kind of growing up, or, things from like your family that you learned and took away early on?
Nothing great. I mean, some great things. I mean, obviously being a little bit facetious, obviously some great things as with any family, but I mean, our house was pretty tumultuous. I had an older brother who had a lot of mental things going on, and he was in and out of hospitals, and just a verbally and physically abusive person. Just not a great scene. He was 6 years older than me. He used to beat the crap out of me, quite a bit. And so folks got divorced when I was 7. Dad left. I don't blame him. I mean, nobody really knew what to do with my brother, and I'm sure he had no clue what to do. And I think the easiest thing for him to do was just to kind of throw his hands up in the air and head out. Of course, left my mom trying to figure things out on her own, which was impossible for her. But, man, it's just all those things that mold you and shape you. I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now for almost 22 years, and I think part of that is just having the skills to do what I feel like I need to do if push ever came to shove, kind of thing.
Right.
And, it just helps you build resilience and tenacity, and so on. And I'm not sitting there saying all things were bad, but, my earliest memories were not great. Not laughing around the Hanukkah bush or Christmas tree, or sitting in the Easter Bunny's lap, or that sort of thing. And then we had some really great times with my grandparents and meals at their house, and I'll never forget the food that grandma used to make. And so man, just a lot of ebbs and flows, but really just always tried to make a buck, no matter how I could, from a very young age. I started raking leaves and shoveling sidewalks and driveways just to always try to have some money on hand. So I've just kind of always been wired that way, and kind of a little bit of a scarcity mentality, just kind of always chasing security. And, again, to some extent it served me well. In other extents, I'm sure that leaves a little to be desired.
Yeah. And how did that, obviously, as you then you're going through that, and like, what was high school like? Like, what type of student were you? Obviously, you talked about kind of getting into it and, having kind of side hustles and different things you're doing to make some money. Yeah. What were like those early, academic years like?
Decent, not great. I was relatively average from a grade standpoint. My saving grace was I played drums. Started playing drums when I was in the 5th grade, and that carried all the way through high school and a little bit into college. But I was in the marching band and the jazz band and the combos and all that stuff, and so I really just poured myself into music, and that helped, gave me something to beat on. It was like the only thing that I could really sort of beat on and control and win the fight, so to speak. So I poured myself into the drums quite a bit. But high school for me never was an athlete. I tried out for a couple teams, but never really had great athletic skill. Not enough to make teams. Our high school was big. It was 3,200 students in our school, right? So wow. A lot of talent in that school. And I just didn't really have the high school experience that some people have. Matter of fact, I just did everything I could to get out of there. I graduated a semester early, just because I was done and I was ready to get out of there.
Yeah, and then you go to Southern Illinois. Shout out to the Missouri Valley.
Yeah.
There, I went to Missouri State, so
it
was Southwest Missouri State at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
And so okay. So again, like, things aren't easy, right? You're finding different outlets. Again, like, there's this kind of entrepreneurial, or just this desire to go out and do things to make your own money, etc. And then in college, I think this is in college, you started a non-alcoholic nightclub.
Yeah.
The Funky Pickle, which obviously is a fantastic name. So talk a little bit about, that in particular. Look, you're in college and you're starting a nightclub. That's not like a small task. Like, what was it about that? And obviously, I know you got into DJing as well too, with this kind of love for music. Like, what was it about? Like, talk about maybe just that experience in particular.
So yeah, I had DJ'd in a number of clubs as nowadays they would call it EDM. Dance music. For me, it was always about Chicago house music.
Right.
And I'd built up a pretty decent following, and just decided, what, I'm making a lot of money for these clubs. Maybe it's time for me to do my own thing. And I never really, didn't really think twice about it. It was just like, hey, there's a space that was a former club. let me raise some money. We'll build this thing out. We'll, try to make it look better than it was, which interestingly enough carries over a lot to the stuff I've done in real estate. But it didn't take a lot of capital, but it took a plan and it took a vision. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to get a liquor license being 19. And so went down the path, and I'll say I was influenced, and a lot of my career has been influenced by other people doing things. I'm not an originator. I have some original thought, of course, but a lot of times I look at what things are out there and look what people are doing, and just figure I can make a better mousetrap. So when I was growing up, there were a couple of non-alcoholic clubs in the Chicago area that I went to, and so I knew it was a thing. Down in Southern Illinois University, which is where I ended up opening the club, there really wasn't anything for the teenagers to do. So I figured, hey, we can cater to those 18 and under for a period of time, maybe 8 till 11:30 at night, and then they'd have to go home and be in bed. But for those 18 and over who wanted to stay up later, why don't we close down at 11:30 and we'll clean up a little bit, and then we'll open up again at midnight. And because we weren't serving booze, we could stay open until 3, 4, 5, 6 in the morning, depending on how long people wanted to stay. And they'd already have their fill in the bars that had to close down around 1:30 or something like that. And so by the time they came over to us, they'd pay a cover charge. They'd be hungry. They'd want some food. And that's pretty much how we made it work, just off of cover charges and food and non-alcoholic drinks.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of youth, right? You're like, we'll just start a club. Like, it'll be cool.
Exactly. Start a club. It'll be cool.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And then what else in college? I mean, obviously, like, as you graduated, I know that's, what was it in the early 90s, where, again, you bought the domain liquor.com early. I mean, this is early, right? This is pre, internet bubble. Like, what was it that you saw, I guess, like that you're like, hey, this can be a thing.
Yeah.
Where you're like, like, what was it like in the tea leaves that you were reading?
So that's definitely a gift, just being able to kind of see where things are going. I'm not going to say that I've always taken full advantage of that vision, but I think I've had a pretty decent track record. And so after the nightclub, I went to work in the family business. My family was in the liquor business. Ironically, I opened a non-alcoholic club, and they were in the liquor business. And so there was a very small piece of that company, which was called Liquor by Wire, which is basically just like FTD for flowers, except if you're in New York and you want to have a bottle of champagne delivered in California, you'd call us, and we'd have one of our local retailers deliver that. So basically FTD for wine, champagne, spirits, gift baskets, etc. And it wasn't doing much when I came on board, but I thought, there's a lot of potential there. So the first thing we did was we started a catalog and started producing a catalog. And then it was like around 93 when you started seeing a lot of these discs pop up in the grocery stores, the AOLs and the Prodigies, and, CompuServes, etc. And I was like, this is pretty cool. People have computers. I had a computer. You pop this disc in and you end up in this interesting little world. Kind of like what you're seeing now in the metaverse, really. But sort of these enclosed ecosystems. And I was like, what? We should open a store here in CompuServe's electronic mall, and that's what we ended up doing. And that was really the first foray into e-commerce. And then around 95, we built a fully functional e-commerce site, one of the first 500
early
e-commerce sites. And then I had the opportunity to buy the domains liquor.com and bourbon.com in 98. And so we jumped at that opportunity, $7,500 for both. And, and it was just one of those things where, to me, it was a no-brainer, because you can reach literally anyone, anytime, anywhere on the planet who has an internet, connection. And it just seemed to me like it was a natural progression of commerce, which obviously it turned out to be.
Yeah. I mean, again, and I think it's like, there's obviously like some foresight there, 7,500, like it's insane to think about now. And then, how did you all deal with the kind of dotcom, right? Is, that whole bubble, kind of burst in, late 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah, not well. We didn't deal with it well. Around 98 or so, after we picked up the domain, we were doing a few $1 million in revenue. So we were doing, decently. I think that's like 500 million in today's numbers or whatever. But, sarcastic. But, the point was all of our quote unquote heavy lifting was done, right? We had all the foundational pieces, all the infrastructure, everything was in place. We just simply needed money to grow and market and whatnot. And so around 99 or so, we started raising capital, and we raised several rounds of funding. And then in March of 2000, we had the S1 filed and we were ready to go public. And of course, that's when everything imploded. NASDAQ was 5,500 at the time, and it basically dropped down around 2K. And we couldn't get out. Everything shut down. The markets shut down. And so we didn't fare well at all. Actually, I ended up walking away from the company entirely. My mom, who was still involved, ended up leaving around 6 months later, and then everything just got shut down. Ironically, I ended up grabbing the domain back about 6 years later. It's a long story, but we literally had to close our doors, and 9 years of hard work. There was no pot of gold at the end of that rainbow.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of companies at that time too. Again, like this type of business is kind of a no-brainer today, right? Like if you look at, like Drizzly and some of these other like minibar and some of these other ones that are, now like straight to your house.
Please don't talk to me about that. Interestingly, we were so early, man. And then in 2009, when we launched the second iteration of liquor.com, literally for 10 years, I fought with the board that I had brought in, the people that I had brought in to help grow this thing, who had no interest whatsoever in selling a single fucking thing. It was like, I don't give a shit what you do, just sell a t-shirt, sell a mug, sell something, let alone sell booze. But they wanted to build it as a media company, and I handcuffed myself by bringing in these folks, and that's an interesting story. But yeah, you look at Drizzly and Minibar, and Drizzly sold to Uber, I think. One of them sold to Uber, and it was painful, or maybe they took an investment from Uber. But anyway, it was just painful to see it, because it was so obvious to me, and I just couldn't get my board to agree to sell something.
Yeah, Uber acquired Drizzly. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. I get it, man. Again, timing can be, timing is timing. Yeah. And, obviously there's other things, right, in your career where, timing was right. How did you get into real estate? After, so kind of just back up to go forward, so after this kind of first run at liquor.com, it's like, go through truly raise the money, like the, kind of prototypical, like what happened to a lot of companies at that stage. Yeah. What then was like, okay, like I'm going to getting into real estate in particular in, 2000, like what was really the reason for that? Like what was like, your thought, or, why that pivot?
It was interesting, right? So when I walked away, literally walked out of the building that we owned that housed liquor.com, and I quit, we lived close enough to the office building that I was walking home and just thinking about, what am I going to do? What am I going to tell my wife? Like, what's going to happen here? Because she had a son when she was much younger. So, he was in our lives at that point. We had our first child in 2003, but this was, this was basically 2000. And so I knew I had to do something, right, to take care of the family as best as I could. And, obviously contribute. I'm not one to sit back and not contribute. So, I just looked around, and I remember being at a gas station. This is a kind of a funny story, but I remember being at a gas station and hearing a cab driver talk to the clerk about how he had bought this condo, and even before closing, he had flipped out of the contract or something like that, and had made $50,000 on it. And I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. And, after the dot-com bubble burst, you started to see a lot of people move into real estate, because that was the next, big bubble before that thing imploded in 2006, 07, 08. But at the time, I just kind of looked at, the tea leaves, so to speak, as you put it. and hearing this conversation and just knowing that, I've always been one of those people that's kind of like, well, if you can do it, I can do it. Right. I mean,
right.
I don't think anyone's smarter than I am. I don't think anybody's dumber than I am, but I don't think anyone's necessarily more capable than I am. And I can't dunk a ball, but if you take a business concept, I should be able to do something with it if somebody else can. And at the time in '98, we had bought a 4-unit building. And so we were living in one of the units, and we were renting out the other units and renting out the garage. And we were making money every month. So fortunately, we were, in the black on that building. But I remember thinking at the time, 2000, after I walked away from liquor.com, that, maybe there's something here to this real estate thing, because I could see what we were doing. We were a real world living proof example of what was possible in that realm, just because of the building that we owned. And so I said, you know what, let me try to jump into this game and talk to a few people about it. And I ended up buying a 7-unit apartment building that we then converted to condominiums, and went from zero to selling it out in about 9 months. Interestingly enough, by the way, our model unit opened on September 11th, 2001.
Oh.
So there you go on that. But obviously, we made it through and sold that one out.
Yeah.
But it was just more a matter of, I think there's an opportunity here to make some money, and I needed to make some money.
Yeah, and it's sometimes that's all it is, right? I think sometimes people look for this like grand vision. It all kind of looks that way later, right? Like it looks like this was all planned. Like it's like this day right here. There's a random, like you just overhear this conversation. You're like, well, I've kind of done it here, and you get into it, and then if you kind of fast forward, what led you to, again, with like Keeper the Keys? What led you? I guess that kind of let's fast forward to 9-10 years, like late 2000s, early 2010. So, what led you to say, hey, I want to start to share these things, or like, I want to get this out, in writing books and, doing other, small, films and other things as well. Like, what was it for you that you're like, hey, like I need to get this kind of out?
Yeah. So it's just one of those moments where you just tend to pivot on a dime there, right? And for me, that moment was really when I was with my stepfather, who I was sitting bedside with my stepfather, who was in his final days of life. He had raised me since I was 10. We weren't all that close in the early years, but we developed a closer bond later in both of our lives. And so it was right around the time of his passing, when I was sitting bedside with him, and I was holding his hand. He could no longer communicate verbally, but I think we were able to connect through that point of physical touch. Because as I was sitting there holding his hand, I had a vision of my funeral, not actually of his funeral, but of mine. And I could hear the words being spoken graveside as I was kind of in that coffin being lowered into the earth. Little peaks of daylight coming through, and again, I could hear what was going on, but couldn't talk, couldn't really respond or anything. And whoever was speaking, I don't remember the voice or who it was, basically said, "Here lies Steve Olsher. He dedicated his life to chasing the almighty dollar." And that's all that was said. And it hit me really hard, because I realized in that moment that my life was of pretty good meaning to me and those closest to me, but really no one else. And so given everything that I had gone through, from a personal perspective, from a business perspective, and so on, I really felt like there was an opportunity to make a bigger difference and make a different sort of impact. And even if, my teachings could, just sharing some of the things that I had learned and the shortcuts that I could help people take, avoid a lot of the trial and tribulation and brain damage. Just feeling like, hey, if I can help some folks here avoid some of that, then that'll probably be a good thing. So that's when I started writing, and that's when I started doing some teaching and coaching.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and if you haven't checked it out, we'll link to, like What Is Your What, and some of the other, books and things that you've done too. Like, everyone should check it out. And then what led you to get into podcasting? Like where was that again? Kind of, if you see kind of, where you're watching things move. I mean, because you started your podcast, or Reinvention Radio back in 2015, right? Which is
2009 was
ahead of the
actually
game.
2009 was the first episode that we released. But yeah, more consistently around 2015 is when we started doing it on a consistent basis. But yeah, the first podcast episode that I recorded and released at Reinvention Radio was actually 2009, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was it about that medium, or like what did you see, or hear from an audio standpoint, because podcast is a really interesting history. If you if people think about it, it's like they kind of came out of the gate like this is a big thing, and then it kind of like had like a slumber a little bit, and then it just exploded right to like where we are today. And we're doing a podcast right now. What was it about that medium? And again, you started to talk about you had this this vision, and it sounds like it's right around that right time of what was it about podcasts, and then you start Podcast Magazine as well too. What was it about that medium, that you were excited about, that you saw as really an, amazing opportunity?
So it was a natural extension of the work that I started to do in the coaching arena and writing arena. Just gave me an opportunity to really share my mission, my message in a much larger way. Radio for me has always sort of been a holy grail. I always thought that I would want to have a radio show. And who knows, maybe one day I still might. But, podcasting really felt, let me back up for 2 seconds. So as I was thinking about Reinvention Radio and I was thinking about having my own show, there are opportunities to buy brokered time on smaller AM stations, sometimes larger stations, et cetera. So I had started to do that. I had bought some brokered time on a small AM station in Chicago. And it wasn't inexpensive. But, the reality was if you weren't in your car or at home with your radio tuned in to that specific channel at that specific time, you wouldn't hear me, right? And so it was a very, very small percentage of the population in the Chicago area specifically that would have had an opportunity to listen to me, let alone globally. And I remember hearing about a podcast, didn't really know what it was, but I remember thinking it's kind of like having your own radio station. It just basically gives you the opportunity to reach almost anyone, almost anywhere, at almost any time on their preferred device. And that's pretty cool because to try to do that on a brokered basis where you're buying time on different stations, I mean, it would cost you a fortune. You probably couldn't even do it. So this was just a new fangled global radio, so to speak, opportunity that I felt held a lot of potential.
And then what led you to start the magazine? I mean, you have a million. I mean, go check out, we'll link to the podcast too, so everyone can check it out.
Yeah.
What led you then to say, I'm going to start, a magazine?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So this was around 2019. That sounds about right. Yeah. 2019. That I was sitting at an event, one of the last events, before COVID started to shut things down. We actually did one of the actual last events in March of 2020, but that's a different story. But it was around September or so of 19. And I was sitting in the audience of this event that Brendan Burchard, who's been around for a long time, had an event called Influencer. And he was at the time thinking about launching a magazine called Influencer Magazine. And I don't think he's actually done anything with it yet, but he was talking about it. And I remember sitting in the audience because he had a sign somewhere talking about it. And I remember he sent out an email at some point. I just thought, that's a pretty good idea. Brendan's really smart. Maybe, he'll sit down with, I don't know, whoever the biggest influencer is at that point and interview them. And then that influencer will share their feature. And that'll go out to millions of people. And then more subscribers will come in and subscribe to the magazine, and he'll be able to meet more people. And I just thought that was really smart, super smart. And then I got to thinking, why isn't there a magazine for podcasts? Our industry is a legitimate industry. It's growing. It's no longer this closeted sort of hobby type industry. Why isn't there a magazine that caters to the industry, much like Rolling Stone does for music or Sports Illustrated does for sports, et cetera. And again, it was just one of those things where I felt like if somebody else can create a magazine, why can't I? And so I'm sitting there thinking, well, if we're going to have a magazine for the industry, it's what else? What are we going to call this thing? And I was like, well, you got to call it. What else would you call it? You got to call it Podcast Magazine, right? I mean, what else would you call it? So I started looking around, and it looked like somebody had tried to do something a few years ago, and it didn't really do much. And I looked for the domain because, of course, that's the next thing you do. And I remember seeing that somebody had the domain, and so then I was like, maybe it's not worth it. I don't want to do a different name, but I found a listing somewhere that somebody was actually trying to sell it. So it was like $2,500 or something like that. And so for podcastmagazine.com. And so I was like, it's just borderline too much, but not crazy.
Right.
And I ended up picking it up for like $2,100 and figured, you know what, let me throw $10,000 at this. I'll buy the domain. We'll get, a couple issues launched and we'll see what happens. And $350,000 or $400,000 later, we're still not making any money with it, but it's opened up a lot of doors. So
sure, I can imagine. And then what time and this is right about the time, this 2019 too, you also started, it's interesting, like timing wise, the Latitude.
Yeah.
And what was kind of the, I guess like desire or drive to jump into that world?
Yeah, so Latitude is really all about, it's the convergence of trends. It's a real estate initiative. It doesn't exist. We haven't launched it yet. I've been doing a lot of kind of legwork on it. But, once my wife and I found the building that I'm now sitting in, where we're going to open a funeral home here in San Diego, that took over. That was the main priority for us. So, but ultimately we'll launch Latitude, which is basically, if you think about the best elements of sort of the digital nomad lifestyle of being able to move from location to location with the flexibility of being able to live in gorgeous places around the world, but then give our members the opportunity to also build equity as if they're homeowners without the headaches of home ownership. That's really what Latitude is. So it's really a new class of housing that I'm calling flexible housing. So it's about flexing rather than renting or owning. But it's really all the benefits of renting combined with the benefits of owning in a lot of really meaningful ways.
Love it. Well, we'll be on the lookout for that for sure. Yeah. And then you hinted at it. So let's talk about like the new for you, right? So you've done all these different pivots, right? And again, you got back into, you mentioned it briefly, back into liquor.com for a while. Real estate, is starting to move. And then, let's talk about the coin that you launched. And let's maybe we can start there. Like, again, everyone's kind of getting into NFTs, et cetera.
Sure.
What was it for you, Steve, where you're like, I think that there's an opportunity here, as you thought about, again, like launching your own coin?
Yeah. So, I've been dancing around the world of Web3 since 2017. And when I say Web3 2017, what I'm really talking about is cryptocurrency.
Right.
So, Web3 is this big umbrella that encompasses a lot of different things, from creator coins to cryptocurrency to NFTs and DeFi and yield farming and staking. And there's a lot of things that fall under the Web3 umbrella, DAOs and, and much, much more. So it was, it was just one of those rare, again, convergence of trends and opportunities where I jumped, obviously as an audio person and being in the podcast space, I jumped on Clubhouse really early. And so
yeah, I did too.
Yeah,
I remember.
And so we built Club Pod from 0 to over 70,000 members in basically 7 months. It was insane. And so we were really active on Clubhouse. My jury's still out. I think there may still be an opportunity there. We'll have to see what that all shakes out to look like.
Yeah.
But I haven't opened a room now for months.
I know. Yeah, I'm the same way. I remember
when I jumped, I'm like, this is amazing. Like I could be in a room. I'll tell you, like when I was like, this is the best. I was in a room, and it was who's the best rapper from Compton, and it was I think it was Coolio, The Game, and like Eazy-E's daughter.
Oh my God.
In a room. I'm like, this is amazing. And Coolio, by the way, claimed that he was the best rapper, just so to put it out there, which was pretty fun. But
you know
I
what?
was definitely the same on Clubhouse.
If I'm Coolio and I'm trying to save face, I'm probably going to vote for myself as well. You know, I mean, yeah, but
entertaining, decent, but best of all time. I'll let people decide. So you jump into Clubhouse. You see the opportunity there early.
Yeah, see the opportunity there pretty early and start connecting with a lot of interesting people. And somehow this whole idea of a creator coin kind of fell in my lap. I saw a couple of people that I knew that were doing this, and Rally.io was trying to launch their platform and get some people involved and so on. And so we launched our own creator coin as a result of the relationships built on Clubhouse, and finding out about it and reaching out for that team, and being able to launch a bold coin about a year ago or so now. And I'm still trying to figure out like really what to do with it and how to work it into our ecosystem. But it seems like really a natural, I talk about the C3 framework, which is really the missing piece, I think, for a lot of people in the creator world, is they have obviously they're creators, right? So they have their own community, and then they are creators, so they have their own content. And a natural progression for those sort of folks, small, medium, large, doesn't matter, is having their own currency. And so I do think the creator coin environment is really interesting because it gives people the opportunity to have their own currency and control that conversation and control really the finances, so to speak, from start to finish. So, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. We continue to play with it and figure out how we're going to best use it. But I'm really excited about what this whole world of creator coins has to offer. And we're just so early with it that we're really just scratching the surface right now.
What is the value for my listeners and people that I think a lot of people see this happening and that aren't as familiar with, some of the things you're talking about. So if someone is a creator or, like what's the value to them? Like how would you explain the value, to a novice who's like, well, my own coin, like what? Like, how do you explain like why this is an interesting and also important time and what the value is to them?
Yeah. So it largely depends on your organization for sure. But the reality is if you have products, programs, and services, you can collect payment for those items with your own currency. Now you may ask, okay, well, that's all well and good, but why would I want to do that? Well, that currency is actually convertible into, fiat. If you want to convert that currency into fiat, it's also convertible into other cryptocurrencies, whether it be Rally Coin, which Rally trades on Coinbase, or even Bitcoin or Ethereum. There are ways for you to take your own coin and then convert that into sort of usable cash, so to speak. But it's like as we shift into this mindset of moving away from fiat as being fiat, meaning the U.S. dollar or the euro or the Canadian dollar or whatever the typical government-backed currencies are, we now start to think differently. And when you have your own coin, you can use it to reward your community for certain activities. So if somebody listens to your podcast and leaves a comment, you can use your own currency for that. If you have an event and you want people to buy tickets for the event or upgrade, from one level to another level, or again, invest in various offerings, you can use your own currency for that. And the way that Rally works is that you actually benefit from being a holder of a particular coin through a reward system, which is probably too convoluted for today's conversation. But the bottom line is that when people pay you in your own currency, you not only have the value of that currency to be able to leverage, it's a real world asset, but then you are also rewarded as the primary holder of your own currency through their ecosystem. So, look, it's not obviously going to be for everyone, but if you dance in the NFT space, people can buy your NFTs using your currency. If you want to, pay for other services, you can use your own currency. The point being, like, anytime you use Visa or MasterCard or any of those, you're going to pay a percentage. You're going to pay a fee simply to receive your money. In this case, you receive 100% of those dollars, so to speak, as opposed to having to go through a liaison or a middle person to process that transaction for you. There's a lot more to it, but those are some of the
cool. I'm on, just so you know, I pulled up Rowley. I'll connect to it. I'd encourage people to go take a look. I mean, it's pretty interesting, man.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna go down this rabbit hole later tonight.
Yeah. Well, if you do, we've got a 1-for-1 thing going. So if you buy Bold Coin, up to 100 Bold Coin, we'll match that. If you hold it, 30 days, buy it today, hold it for 30 days, just let us know. And however long that, whenever you're seeing this and whenever you're hearing this, just email kelly@steveolsher.com and we'll actually match it coin for coin.
Yeah, we'll put that in the notes for sure. And then let's fast forward as we kind of up to like what's, I always ask people, what's the latest and greatest, and you hinted at it before. So you've done all these things. So you've early on the online game, then get into real estate development, then podcasting, then kind of back into liquor.com for a little bit, staying with the real estate. And now I launched your own coin, Bold Coin. Again, we'll link to that. So as we kind of start to kind of wrap up here in the next few minutes, and now you're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a funeral home, which to me is like, again, it's kind of like it's another one of those things. It's like, how do you even, think about that, right? Like, so tell me a little bit about like, why a funeral home, and like, what's the, what are you obviously excited about for like this new endeavor?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's my wife's passion. It's her calling. It's what she's felt like she wanted to do from the time that she was a very young little girl.
Wow.
So after our youngest went to school, so when he went to kindergarten, my wife felt like she wanted a career change. She had been a Chicago public school teacher. And felt like she wanted a career change, and actually at 40 went back to school to get a degree in mortuary science because she wanted to be a funeral director and embalmer. And so she really just has had this calling for most of her life, and it was a perfect time for her to be able to do that. And so at 40, she went back to school, and then she started working in the industry as a funeral director, as an embalmer. And we moved here to San Diego. And so she worked in the industry here for a number of years. And then we really felt like it was time for her to have her own place. And we started looking. And it's been a lot of hoops, it's been a lot of hurdles.
I bet.
But, in the next, let's just say, in early May of 2022, we will open San Diego's first, let's just say, in the last 60 years, there hasn't been a full-service mortuary opened in the city of San Diego. So we'll be opening the first one to launch here in about 60 years. So, it's definitely a calling for her, and I, of course, want to do whatever I can to help bring that dream to fruition for her. So, I'm here helping, and we'll be actively involved.
That's exciting, man. Yeah, that's really exciting. So what's next? I mean, what's next for you? Like, what are you excited about? Like, what are again, obviously you're diving into the, the coin space and these other, you've got enough irons in the fire, but what's the next, I guess, interesting or thing that you've got your eye on?
Yeah, I'm going to do some more real estate development for sure. So I'll get back and do a few projects, acquire some stuff and, get involved in that world. But I really do think that an opportunity fund is something I want to launch. It's something I've been talking about doing for a number of years because of the ability to see trends and to really, understand kind of where that puck is going, so to speak. Just having a fund that provides flexibility around real estate or tech or, NFTs or you name it, just to be able to have the flexibility to invest as we deem appropriate and hopefully just provide outsized returns for our investors is really something I'm excited about doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, then it's time to be the bank, right? That's whenever you start the fund.
Yep.
That's when it really gets interesting.
Yeah.
Well, look, man, this has been a really interesting and kind of in-depth, fun conversation for me. I mean, just again, talking a little bit about, your background and, kind of all the different things that you did and how they've kind of led to this like amazing place, where you're at now. And you've got all these different kind of things you're working through. And I think hopefully for a lot of people listening, like you said, I think the thing I texted my podcast, I was like, this is definitely the name of the episode, which was, let me see, what did I send him? It said, someone else can do it, so can I. From my side, it's like, I think so many people listening to that, it's just because someone else isn't doing it. I think a lot of people, they stop from doing things. Well, someone else is already doing whatever. And, that already... It's like, no, like that's actually where a lot of inspiration comes from. I'd say that all the time. My early career, like how I built my early sales careers, I just ripped off other people's best practices. And I'm like, oh, that seems to be working. I'll do that. Yep. And so I think for a lot of people listening, I think, Steve, they're going to have a lot of takeaways and hopefully a lot of, like encouragement and positive vibes around, how they can go, pave their own path and that they don't have to be this amazing, like, brand new, even though you do have a lot of like really new and interesting ideas too.
For sure.
They can also not reinvent the wheel and go create something really amazing.
Yeah. I one of my favorite expressions, my wife says I just borrow from others. I don't know if this is mine or someone else, but one of my favorite expressions is that you don't have to recreate the wheel. You just simply have to paint it your own color.
All right. I like that. That might maybe that will be the episode.
There you go.
I like that one. Well, look, Steve, I appreciate you, man. And like I said, this is a really fun conversation. I think our listeners will get a ton out of the conversation. And big thank you to you and thank you to everyone for tuning in. And we will see you next week. I'm really excited. I really want to hear your feedback on this episode. I think, again, there's just so many kind of little notes I jotted down too. And Steve, thank you again. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another extremely fun and interesting episode. I thought it was fun and interesting, so I hope you did too, of the Jake Dunlap Show. Really great, just breaking down everything that makes people who they are, the success, the trials and errors, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, and make sure, more than anything, to go over to jakedunlap.com. That's where you're going to stay up to date on all the latest guests, additional details, prep notes. We're going to be sharing everything on jakedunlap.com. So go ahead, go over there. You can subscribe there as well too, and we will see you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.